The popular YouTuber Kalel has recently described this kind of depression that she's dealing with, where she's reluctant to leave her flat and doesn't really communicate with people unless it's on the internet. And it sounds to me similar to this phenomenon in Japan where there's a large group of youngsters who are basically socially withdrawn. They're all suffering from a similar condition and they're called the hikikomori, those who have pulled inward, the word means. And the same thing's been happening here in London. It might be something we see globally as time goes on. And experts say it may be due to the demands of society being too great. But there's also an aspect of our culture that's related to Marshall McLuhan's idea that the medium is the message that I wanted to discuss now, because I think this inevitably contributes to depression. And it's something the ancients knew and a subject that comes up in arts education, but because it's not studied in the realm of technology, and it's the technologists who are designing our future, in my opinion, they're just doing it wrong. And the subject is verisimilitude, how like reality something is. Because we've got lots of technology that now masquerades as reality and insinuates itself into our social interactions, I think after a while our body starts to believe that whatever is going on through that screen, it's crucial to our survival. And in some ways it is. I mean, this is our access to the wider world. And so the body helps us focus on the screen by metaphorically reducing the resolution of the real world outside it. Because that's how our system normally guides us towards what's important and away from what isn't. You know, if you're hungry, the body uses hormones to make everything that isn't food seem irritating and irrelevant until after you've eaten. And if you're in love, it makes every person who isn't the one you're in love with seem like a slight waste of time. You know, you can get a text from a beloved relative and be like, oh yeah, great, because you're who I wanted to hear from, sort of thing. And so I think that when your main pathway to friends, relationships, even communicating with your family is a screen or is your phone, your brain starts derealizing reality. Because it happened to me growing up. I was like a modern youngster. You know, when other people were out socializing, I didn't do that as much. I watched way too much TV. And as a result, I started having a sense that reality was like a film set, like nothing had any substance to it. Everything looked like it was made of plastic or polystyrene. And there was like this terrible feeling there's something missing. I don't know what it is. I feel the need to pursue something, but I can't tell what. There's just an emptiness going on here. And I thought it was straightforward depression. Interestingly enough, you'll be the judge of that, but other people my age didn't feel this, but that's because they were out socializing. And now it seems that young people talk about this feeling much more because they're all behaving in a similar way, spending way too much time with screens and not enough time in the real world. What made me understand the connection later was the fact that meditation made the emptiness stop. And that's when I realized what the mechanism of something like mindfulness is. Mindfulness meditation is the focus on your sensory perception, so your experience of colors and sounds and everything, to the point where you're so concentrated on that you forget everything else. And then the other kinds of meditation ask you to empty your mind completely until you start even forgetting your sensory perception, because those kinds want you to focus solely on the experience of being conscious. But both are asking you to do the same thing. They're asking you to pay attention to what is, what you can perceive, with such intensity that you crowd out everything that you can't perceive. So you get rid of thoughts of the past and future and thoughts of people who aren't there and things that aren't now. And in other words, you crowd out abstraction in favor of reality. Now that practice, I would argue, is the exact opposite of watching TV, because with the latter, you sit down, defocus your mind, and engage with the illusion on screen and pretend to yourself that it really is a portal to another world. Because the way you can watch actors and forget they're acting just shows you how credulous a part of your brain is, even though you know consciously it's just a TV screen. And when we're doing this, we crowd out reality. You forget your situation. It's an emphatic no to the present moment. And you're replacing that with this authored abstraction. And you might be doing this for several hours a day. So if daily meditation practice has been shown to alter the brain structure physically over time, to improve a person's ability to focus and their capacity to live in the moment, what it does is it reduces the activity in areas of the brain that are assigned to ruminating and chattering about stuff. Then it stands to reason to me that watching TV every day might also change your brain physically in the opposite direction, and it might make it less engaged with the present moment and less engaged with reality and much more prone to being dragged down these rabbit holes of abstract fears, random thought processes. If you're very used to going along with authored content, you might be much more susceptible to marketing messages that pop up and then stay in your mind. And there's also the issue with TV that it's inviting you to adopt another frowned upon mindset in spiritual traditions, which is the pursuit of things outside yourself. Religion has been telling us for ages that you should have happiness as a foundation that comes from within you, and this is something that is achievable, and you shouldn't rely on, in psychology, it's an external locus of control. You shouldn't allow external things to control your happiness. But TV's worse than that, because it's actually encouraging you to pursue things that don't even exist. They're not just outside you. You could never even get them and be disappointed. I mean, in order to compete in the crowded media marketplace, the content on TV is artificially appealing. It's edited to be less boring than real life. It's, brighter, more vibrant. On the other hand, it's not real. So you can never really engage with it. And if you start desiring what you see through the screen, even if you start desiring the people who are nothing like that in real life most of the time, then television has, in a way, affected a theft by transmission, because you were fine before you saw all this, but then it implanted a desire in you that can never be fulfilled. So it robbed you of some of your happiness by telling you this lie and getting you addicted to it. And when you couple that with the fact that TV robbed my generation of parental attention to the point where suddenly everyone felt the only way to get a real sense of validation was to somehow get into that screen, you can see why there is a drive for all of us now to merge with that world and reunite with this thing that we feel is missing. It's because it's been robbed from the physical world. Everyone's now paying attention to this box in the corner of the room. And it's a very common story that we hear from famous people that once they made it, once they became famous, they were kind of amazed to discover it's just ordinary reality in the screen. It's like, I thought this was another, it's just like every other part of the space-time continuum. When the media employs too much verisimilitude, when it becomes indistinguishable from reality, it fools our subconscious mind into thinking it's something that we can get into, and also something that we need to get into at all costs. The problem, of course, being it doesn't exist. The reason meditation seems to work is because when you focus on what is, you're training your brain physically to understand this is the real world that I want you to give me more of. I don't want the realm of abstraction to be vibrant and colourful and detailed because I can never get into it. This is the place that I want to be warm and hospitable. I don't want to feel like I'm trespassing everywhere. I don't want to feel like it's drained of all colour and irrelevant and void of any beacons of purpose for me. I want to feel I belong here. This has to be my home. And in concentrating on the physical world by meditating, that's what you're doing. You find over time your brain seems to get the message. And that really irritating thing that people tell you, oh, you need to live in the moment more often. Yeah, nice idea, but you can't do it. Like it's actually not an intellectual endeavor. You can know that you should live in the moment, but it's about whether your brain has the gates to the present moment opened. And meditation is the way of doing that. So it's weird because a lot of us try to deal with our problems intellectually. That's, talk therapy and stuff. But this is an experiential thing that you have to enter into as a practice of faith. And even though it doesn't seem like it's going to work, the fact that so many people have done it throughout history means there's probably something in it. And I was amazed when I found that meditating by just sitting there for 5 minutes in the morning and at night, repeating a mantra with my eyes closed, you can repeat it out loud or in your head. I don't really think it matters what the mantra is, but could be Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That's the Buddhist one that I use. I found that doing that over time, to the exclusion of all other thoughts as much as possible, started making reality look real. And it had never been that way as far back as I can remember. So I've only had reality for the past 3 years now. And remember when you were a child and excited about going to a party, and then remember how you could feel the same excitement about going to the shops or like up the road or something. It's because there is this potential for joy in ordinary things. It's just that telling a person who's depressed that doesn't mean they can access any of it. And again, you have to open the gates with force to allow yourself to feel this way. And that's what I think meditation does. It ups the ratio of your engagement with reality to your engagement with abstraction, things that aren't here and now. So I think the depersonalization that some young people feel, the inability to live in the moment, or the fact that they just feel depressed, might be connected to a lifetime of the older generation training them to be concerned with things that don't exist, and some lies, from marketers that they're not good enough, a lot of negative messages that are being delivered one-to-one to these people. And the fact that they're put into pursuit mode forever, because we've taught young people to believe this is as good as it gets. We all love and socialize and connect at a constant remove. So there is no oneness. There's just ceaseless striving and longing, and that's it. And if the depression thing was like that for me in the old days, just from watching TV, and if it's like this for youngsters using the internet now, what on earth is it going to be like when augmented reality takes off and we're invited to constantly live in the world of abstraction? I mean, you've only got so much consciousness to go around. The more that's assigned to things that aren't real, the less capacity you have for connecting with the present moment. And it translates into joy, as it turns out. It doesn't really sound relatable the way it's written in religions and spiritual traditions and all that, but it turns out your ability to connect with reality is what seems to give you access to a sense of well-being. When you think about the growth of the mindfulness movement, an idea that seeks to reunite people with reality, I mean, that's not a good sign, is it? That's possibly an indication that we're losing our grip on what really exists. The frustrating thing about this is the ancients always understood verisimilitude in art is dangerous. A lot of our art today is just taken up by people telling the rest of us what it's like to be them, and we get an insight into their world. And that's a reflection of our current societal problem, where we don't have the connectivity we used to. So we probably don't hear from them first person how they're feeling. They have to express these things in therapy or in art. And so, it does serve a purpose. But in the old days, art was about teaching society lessons en masse, because, life back then was more about general survival. And with less complex legal systems, it's quite funny how much of art used to be kind of saying, well, hang on, don't get into fights, don't commit adultery. If you do this, do you know what will happen? And Greek tragedy, for instance, would play out universal themes and allow the audience to then see the chains of consequence, running over time, and what would happen if you did this stupid but tempting thing, and so on. And in teaching these lessons through art, the ancients used really stylized techniques. In myth, for example, there are gods and animals representing universal archetypes. These are not stories about regular people. And you might think, well, if they were about regular people, they'd be more relatable. Why are they doing it this way? And the reason is that they wanted to give the viewer or the listener enough distance from the narrative to be able to see the action and the consequences of the action from an omniscient perspective. They understood that we often miss lessons in our own lives and keep making the same mistakes over and over again because we're too close to what's happening to be able to see it clearly. So in storytelling, you can avoid us being as idiotic in that context as we are in real life by giving us a detached point of view. So for example, in Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf is an animal because I suppose the message is sometimes a predator masquerades as your friend and you have to look out for that. If the wolf was just a regular guy, someone like me might listen to the story and be as stupid as I am in real life and be like, well, psychopath or no psychopath, I can't help but find the man attractive. He knows what he wants and he goes after it. But because he's a wolf, I don't feel that way about him because they've made him an alien. He's some kind of other, and that is what helps deliver the message. And this device has been used throughout the ages. Stravinsky, for instance, as a more modern example, would accompany tragic scenes in his musical theatre with happy music sometimes, so that the audience wasn't being buffeted around by manipulative mood music and had a detached enough point of view to take in the messages of the narrative intellectually. Music itself is very emotional, but at least it's not really like everyday life. It's its own thing. It's stylized already. But even so, in media like opera, you're not always experiencing emotion. There are arias or songs in opera where you're allowed to engage emotionally, but then there's lots of sections where the music's really dull. It's almost as boring as speech, and that's because they're trying to relate the narrative and have you engage with that intellectually rather than emotionally. And this comes from ancient Greece and the idea that if you're too immersed in the action, you're going to be as stupid as you are in real life and you won't pick up the morals. So in the past, because art was for teaching, if something was too realistic, the worst that could happen was you wouldn't pick up the story and the messages very well. Because art is now not used to teach, it's used to take your money, it's a kind of bait. In fact, art isn't really giving us anything most of the time because the artist used to supply something that the general population couldn't. That's what made them an artist. But now they are trying to get money from us. So they look at what we already have and what we already like and manufacture something like that. So they're commercial manufacturers now. But because this bait is designed to take our money, that's the thing that verisimilitude makes us risk missing. We can't see what's happening because this just looks like real life to us. Television, for example, doesn't seem like the biggest crime of the last century, but it monetized time that used to be assigned to engaging with one's family, and it just stole love from children. Now, obviously, radio, newspapers, and books did that, but because you have to engage with those things and you're the dynamo that makes the pictures when you use those, I don't think they had the effect that TV did. TV's much more realistic. It requires hardly any engagement, and it just obliterated family life completely. And nobody could see it because, as I think Guy Debord said, it's its own advertisement. So if you are in a room where a family is huddled around a TV screen, you don't see the pathos of them sitting there like zombies because you're also looking at the screen. So it's only been recently, when the screens have been too small for the rest of us to see because they're handheld, that we've actually seen the spectacle of these fossilized casualties wandering around absent from life in an onanistic trance, crashing into lampposts. But in my day, like I say, everyone had this ravenous hunger to be famous, to the point where we created the demand for reality TV, so we all had a chance of being famous, and then social media, because we want to unite with this thing that we can't ever merge with. And that's how the marketers like it, because we're in constant pursuit mode. Now social media has monetized the time that friends used to spend with each other by decanting every social interaction, including sex, it would seem, out of the space-time continuum, since that can't be commercially harnessed, and into a medium that can be wires and screens and server space and all that. They've robbed people of their friends as well. And because this level of verisimilitude is even greater than television, because it asks the user to interact and collude in the lie that this is reality, this is natural behavior to talk over screens, people really are too close to the action to see the wolf in grandma's clothing. They don't get it. And the way these media work is by addicting us and repurposing our dopamine responses to everyday life so that they no longer serve us, but our brain chemistry now serves them. And I used to think these assholes didn't know what they were doing. I just thought they were stupid idiots and they couldn't predict what was coming. But now, if we're seeing en masse what's happening, and our problem is that we're addicted to this societal setup, that if you opt out, you're opting out of socializing altogether, and it's hard to know the way back from this. Nonetheless, if we can see what's happening, then of course they know the devastation they're causing because they're the ones doing all the analytics stuff, and it is absolutely staggering to me that they persist. Because imagine if your lifestyle had improved 1,000-fold because you're running a successful startup that had taken off, and then you start reading that, your product is linked to teenage suicides and self-harming, eating disorders and depression. Wouldn't the majority of people think, I can't live with the pain of this, my material lifestyle isn't helping, so I'm just going to step down from this company, or I'm going to talk publicly about the problems with it. But they don't. They just carry on. They're obviously in a very weird mindset that doesn't mind that they're ruining young people's lives. As Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. And the message of social media is not about its content, because the content could be very worthy. The message is, this is the way that we interact with each other, where we're not in the same room. And this is better than natural connectivity, because this, as you can see, is more convenient and more effective. And we believe it because it's been designed to manipulate us, and it's been designed to seem indistinguishable from real life. If it was less convenient, if you had to go to a central mainframe to pick up your tweets instead of just looking on a handheld device, we would see more clearly this stuff is an impression of reality. It's not the real world. But we are buying it. Youngsters are apparently socializing 70% less than they did only a decade ago. That's according to the author Sam Vaknin in an interview that I'll link to below. Sexual encounters in young people are down by 50% in the same time span. In fact, I've seen documentaries where young men say they have to imagine pornography when they're in a real intimate situation because that's what they've been conditioned to respond to physically. So again, industry is training you so that your dopamine responses, your biology serves them and doesn't serve you. Parasites who are stealing your physical resources and your ability to connect with the people you love so they can make more money. And I'm sorry I'm delivering this message via social media because that's what I'm critiquing. But because the technology is the backbone of our species and behavior, it seems to me that's one way of doing it, to speak out on these media against them and hope that the message, if more and more people say it, eventually outweigh the medium over time, and encourage others to engage in practices that de-yoke the human mind from the harness of industry. Meditation, I would recommend. The hero's quest, as Jordan Peterson might put it, is to recognize there are better joys in reality. And this experience of well-being is something for which you evolved, and it is your birthright. Industry has knowingly attempted and succeeded in closing off the gates in many of our minds to real rewards so that it can con us all with the false rewards of their creation, spectres that don't exist but keep us in that mode of constantly pursuing them. So this should not be up to young people, but they are being forced into being their own parents. And if you are young, sadly it looks like there's no one else who's going to help. You have to take it upon yourself to investigate ways of reconnecting with the real world and subduing our endemic addiction to commercial abstraction. And when you see the impact that young people have had on another amoral and almost identical industry, animal agriculture, it's definitely possible. Thanks a lot for watching. Share your comments below if you'd like to, and I'll see you next time.